Thank you for joining me. My name is Josh Brandon. I'm an actor and social media activist from Knoxville, Tennessee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and thank you even more for hearing me, and my most sincerest thanks for considering these words. My experience with gun violence is as lengthy and vast as my experience with mental health. My father, Eddie Brandon, was, among other things, a proud American patriot, a Second Amendment advocate, and what I hear far too often, a responsible gun owner. He was also an abusive, bigoted, sociopathic narcissist, an extremist who was somehow radicalized in his political and social views. I was raised around guns my entire childhood into young adulthood. The issues I'm about to express today are not unresolved daddy issues, but resolved deconstruction through years of therapy, earnest reflection, education, and self-awareness. You see, I grew up to be a proud American patriot too, just a different brand of American patriot than some of you might be used to. Someone who studied James Madison and the Second Amendment to understand what the original intent was and how it's been bastardized for the sake of profit and political posturing. I've also grown up around those responsible gun owners. I'd like to give you the spoilers of this speech up front. My father, who I'm about to introduce you to, by my vast and first-hand experience, is the rule and not the exception to it when it comes to those who speak openly, loudly, and proudly about being responsible gun owners. Before I was an actor, voice artist, and social media activist, I was a radio programmer and personality for 2 decades, mostly in the country music industry. Then, working in the automotive sales industry in small rural areas, I have witnessed gun deals and exchanges happening in broad daylight in parking lots, out of trunks of people's cars, radio stations, car dealerships, some of those legal, some of those not, every one of them disturbing. I've literally hundreds of examples similar of my own experiences, to which I'm about to detail for you. My father was born in 1942, a small rural town in Tennessee. My father politically, don't know what to call him, but I heard him talk, and I would say he was a radicalized extremist. Like many of your fathers, he was from a different time. Maybe it's unfair to judge him on modern standards. My father's temper, anger issues, abusiveness, narcissism, and hatred for others should not be glossed over. My father would do everything he could to help his fellow man, even if those men he looked down on because of the color of their skin. A walking contradiction. Maybe you can relate with your own. In 1956, when he was 14 years old, my father lost his right eye in an incident involving a firecracker. He was restricted from contact sports thereafter, military, and almost assuredly that affected his social life, his social standing. My grandparents, Helen and Joe Brandon, became activists fighting for laws, regulations, and policies to be in place regarding fireworks. I have old newspaper clippings about their fight to ban fireworks, which clearly didn't work. Still, reforms were made to make people safer. Despite some of the same oppositional outcry we hear today, my grandparents fought so that other kids wouldn't have access to something that would cost them so much. Granted, not covered by our Bill of Rights, but a problem was found the hard way and people sought solutions and resolutions to spare others suffering. Over fireworks. I'm running low on time, so I want to tell you that the stories and examples I'm about to rush through, they have so much more nuance and detail to them that I could filibuster for 3 days consecutively. My father raised me with the ideal of if you ever pull a gun on someone, you better be ready to kill them. Thanks to that, from about the age of 10, I've been ready to take human life. Unfortunately, the gravity of taking a human life was not taught to me, just that if I aimed, I better aim for the head. My father wasn't much of a hunter for most of my life. Still, he owned an arsenal of firearms of all kinds, even illegal kinds. One day, son, maybe not in my lifetime, but definitely in yours, we're going to see a revolution, he'd say over and over. I'd shake my head and make jokes about which care facility I'd send him to. January 6, 2021, as I watched in abject horror, the very hill I speak to today was invaded in an insurrection, an attempted coup of our government with sociopathic, radicalized extremists, just like my father, seeking to hang the vice president for not overturning a free and fair election. With zero doubt in my mind, were my father alive, he would have been at that insurrection. I assure you, father or not, I would wish him to spend the rest of his life in a cell for the safety and protection of all. And the fact that America isn't doing that today to those insurrectionists will be something we regret. If you don't think that that is tied to gun violence, ladies and gentlemen, you're naive. There were many statements recorded on audio, video, many that weren't, that day, speaking about how they wish they had brought more guns to the insurrection. I've heard this talk my entire life. My father, the responsible gun owner, taught me everything about guns, except how to properly store a weapon. See, my father never believed in gun safes and barely believed in locking his doors. My father rarely locked his car or truck where he kept a pistol with ammo under the seat at all times. My father's arsenal instead was in his closet, leaned in a corner, dozens of rifles and more. The smaller guns were in cases or drawers, or as was the norm, on top of the bookshelf by the front door. My father, the responsible gun owner, in the months before his death in 2007, would have his unlocked home broken into and his arsenal of firearms and ammunition stolen. I say this in testimony, I believe with 110% certainty that my father orchestrated that. To sell them, to keep them from coming in my hands so I destroy them, or to put them in someone else's hands who would use them. I want to tell you about the time that I almost shot my dad with the gun from the bookshelf because I hadn't been home and seen him in a while, and he lost so much weight that I thought he was a burglar. Or I want to tell you about the time that I pulled a gun on a door-to-door preacher for waking me up at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning because my dad taught me that if somebody comes into my yard, ... we don't think about what comes after that, though. The cops just came to the door, and we all laughed about it. My father, the responsible gun owner, would set up a makeshift deer blind outside his bedroom window on the inside to pick off deer in the backyard. We lived in a subdivision, okay? The elementary school was behind our home, just over the hill through the woods. And this is no surprise, since my father was also the responsible gun owner that would step out on the front porch to pick off squirrels off the power lines in a subdivision. When I was in high school, one of the neighbor's dogs would come into our basement. Dad worked from home and often left the garage door open. The dog would defecate in the floor. I was the one who had to clean it up. I complained about this, and my dad told me he'd take care of it just to let him know the next time the dog came in the basement, you know. I saw the dog about to pop a squat when I called for my dad. In a surreal moment I could only watch unfold, my father opened the door, walked halfway down the stairs, 3 steps away from me, and with his .22 rifle in hand, aimed it with his good eye, and pop, 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 pop. Now, the first shot, I saw the hole pierce the side of that small brown wiener dog, the dog as big as my thigh, and Dad had shot it twice. The second hole oozed a rapidly swelling pool of blood. The dog fell to the floor. It took me years to come to terms with the next 4 shots my dad would fire into that dog. Its black collar, its name tag soaked with blood. I lack the memory of the sound of the dog, and I am so grateful to either my brain or the gun for blocking that out. My dad, like nothing happened, handed me 2 hefty bags and told me to dispose of the body. I had to pick that dog up, put it into a bag, and carry it deep into the woods behind our house, with fears of tears that would either cause ridicule or a beating. My brother, Robert Brandon, his first son, never lived up to Dad's expectations, and Robbie paid for it. Robbie had a lazy eye as a small child. I think that sort of triggered my dad because of his glass eye to toughen Robbie up so he could handle the bullying. Robbie wasn't made of that kind of stuff. My father robbed my brother of the emotional strength needed to get through the darkest times life throws at us. Then my father, the responsible gun owner, would exhibit the kind of negligence any gun owner should be above. In 1999, my brother went through a dark, depressive episode. Momentary problems, but his mental health, due in large part to the toxic and abusive nature of our childhood, would prompt him to make a permanent mistake, one he would pay for the rest of his life, and one for which we would pay for the rest of ours. This is also my statement to federally decriminalize and legalize cannabis, because it would have and could have saved his life. The next morning, Dad, the responsible gun owner, thought it would be a great idea to take my brother, Robbie, up on the mountain shooting. Blow off some steam like we used to when we were kids. When they got home, Dad, the responsible gun owner, put the .357 Magnum back on the top of the bookshelf, like always. Even after the cops came to the house, even after I almost shot the man, then Dad, the responsible gun owner, went to the basement to make some business calls. My brother only got more and more depressed. Robbie got up, walked to the bookshelf, took that .357 Magnum, and walked outside, pacing around the house until he got to the side, made his peace, and turned the gun on his own temple. My brother's brilliant mind, that brain that could understand astrophysics, mechanical engineering, and complex scientific theories without any formal education, was splattered across my father's house, and all of us literally and figuratively left to pick up the pieces. When someone takes their own life, even if they leave a note, even if they tell you, you will never understand why. But Robbie was a victim of trauma. I realize that now. My brother, like I, suffered a lot of emotional, physical, and mental abuse from my dad, who was a victim of his own unresolved traumas, punishing everyone in his path because of it. My father was loving and worked hard to provide for us, but he also hit us, called us names, and verbally eviscerated all of us. I struggled with suicidal thoughts most of my early life. I attempted suicide so many times. I wrote and produced a song about it. These themes are so prevalent in my life. They're the foundation of my podcast. They are the bulk of my social media content. I can't get away from it. Ladies and gentlemen, I've spent years breaking down my father as a psychological case study, even though I am not a psychologist, as a means to understand and deconstruct some of the toxic, sexist, racist, bigoted, and radical ideals he imposed upon me. His attitudes on guns and human life were at the foundation of these ideals. How he was radicalized and by whom, I have no idea. I just know that my father spoke just like I hear so many of these people in my comments, in my podcast, my TikTok, my YouTube, in real life. So many comments from proud, responsible gun owners, just like my dad. The fact is, a responsible gun owner will never let you know they have one. And those who do, those who boast and make it their personality, need to be seen for the cultists and sociopaths they are and need to be treated for such conditions. Mine is not a speech to generalize every gun owner in America as a sociopathic, radicalized extremist, like my father was, but to say that America does very little to combat sociopathic, radicalized extremists in our midst. America even elects some of them to office, I'm afraid. We have no choice in this country but to enact sweeping and drastic legislation that will take courage to pass. It will take patience to convince we the people that it is in our own best interest to save lives. And we must recognize that when others begin to make excuses as to why we shouldn't do whatever is necessary to stop another mass shooting, another school shooting, another suicide, we need to see these proud, responsible gun owners for what they are. Because that lack of empathy and compassion has a psychological diagnosis that we cannot and should not ignore, nor should we have a system that enables that person to ever aim a gun at someone. Empathy and compassion are the traits you need in someone in order to trust them to wield a weapon with that kind of destructive force, to recognize the gravity of it. We used to say, put those people on the front lines, infantry or cops. They'll make the hard calls when someone with a soul might have to pause and consider their action. In 2022, we see the cost of having some of those people in those positions. They kneel on a man's neck for 9 minutes. You see, a sociopath doesn't need a gun to kill. He just needs power. We can do something to take some of that power away and make it harder to obtain that power for those who have these traits I've spoken about. Ladies and gentlemen, Republicans too, we have an opportunity to take a stand before the entire world because they are watching what we are doing on this subject. They want us to take human life seriously for once. Are we ready to? Are you ready to? Do you have the courage to act? Because I promise you, if I had the courage not to blow my brains out as badly as I wanted to for most of my childhood, knowing that guns were just in the closet with the ammo right there, if I had the courage to survive losing my brother, if I had the courage to survive living with my father, ladies and gentlemen, you can pull up your bootstraps and you can have the courage to save human lives. Thank you for your time.